How's it going, guys? I'm Jared, and welcome back to Trash Classics. Now, do me a favor real quick. Close your eyes and think of gaming's longest running and most storied dynasties. By any chance, did you think of the Ys series? No? Well, I can hardly blame you. If you're watching this in America, statistically speaking, there's a good chance you grew up without the consoles that gave the Ys series life. And when half a game series spent most of its time on Japan-only systems like the NEC 9801 and the Sharp X68000, you can't exactly bank on brand recognition, which explains my first experience with Ys being the PS2 game, The Ark of Nepishtim. And since my indoctrination into the cult of Ys came after the series took on a more traditional action RPG fighting system, the older, top-down entries have always seemed kind of unapproachable for me. But as luck would have it, I spent almost a week at home sick, and when looking through Steam to find something to occupy my mind, I decided it was high time I tackled the game that started it all. In Ys 1, you play as a doll, which, now that I think about it, seems kind of redundant to say, seeing as you play as him in most of the Ys games. But anyways, a doll washes up on the shores of Asteria, an island that's been plagued by a storm wall that keeps anyone from entering or leaving. After a lengthy recovery period, Adal's rescuers tell him that not being able to reach the outside world hasn't been their only worry, as it seems the storms have brought a flood of monsters with them. With a lack of any persuasion from the villagers, Adal decides to investigate these occurrences on his own, and this is where our adventure begins. Now, I've heard people criticize the early Ys games for their light stories, and maybe that's why I was surprised by how satisfying the narrative was. It's true there isn't a grand epic on display here, but you're given more than enough to justify a heroic adventure, and it's paced well enough that I never got bored. That being said, the story does ramp up in epicness closer to the end. And with the story out of the way, it's high time we talked about the combat. Ys 1 uses a system that, to my knowledge, is 100% unique to the series. Instead of pressing an action button to perform some kind of attack, the mere act of bumping into an enemy will damage it. And if you're like me, this is a very odd concept to wrap your head around. The good news is, it's not as simple as it seems on the surface. Hitting an enemy head-on will give them a chance to damage you, so unless you love video game load screens, you're going to want to attack either from behind, at an angle, or even just hitting the enemy a little off-center. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this combat mechanic has always been the reason I hesitated to explore the earlier entries in one of my favorite series, but I'm happy to say the aptly titled bump system is pretty easy to get used to. After getting into the outside areas and level grinding, I found the system to be pretty damn intuitive. When you're out in a large area, finding an opening and attacking is fairly easy. The only problem with that is you spend a large portion of your time navigating the narrow pathways of several dungeons. This changes things up a little, and while it's not a deal breaker, I did find myself taking a decent amount of cheap hits thanks to the cramped surroundings. It also doesn't help that stopping and catching your breath won't heal your lost HP like it does out in the field, so leveling up before a new dungeon is highly recommended. And speaking of difficult, this game has some tough as nails bosses. I always thought the bump system would have made a straight up brawl with a boss like we're used to in an action RPG a little boring. Well, it looks like the game's developers were one step ahead of me. Each boss has a trick to them that keeps you from hammering on the damage, like being surrounded by pillars of flame or turning into a cluster of bats. These fights are the most strategic and difficult the game has to offer, and to up the ante, you're also prohibited from using health restoring items. Despite Ys 1's sharp sprites, 3D effects, and redrawn anime artwork, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a very old game, and I mean that as a compliment. The brass tacks, no bullshit approach to the story was refreshing. The somewhat simple setup led into a really enjoyable narrative that kept things brief but still managed to tell a sweeping tale of fantasy. The combat emphasized fast thinking and speedy reactions, and there was also a focus on leveling up when a boss was too hard. The game also relied on the player to figure out what area to tackle next. Now, a lot of these are elements that we gamers have decided need to be kept out of modern games, but after my time with Ys 1, I can say it's damn refreshing to jump into such a classically designed, polished experience. It seems like the game's designers really understood the scope of what they wanted to accomplish and filled it with just enough content to make their world feel alive and interesting. Little things like the small offering of armor, swords, and accessories made finding a new item exciting. And for those of you with shit to do, don't worry, first-timers will be viewing the ending in less than 7 hours. Overall, Ys 1 was a fun romp into a simpler time of game creation. It kept me engaged with its story, and the breakneck pace of the combat made me feel like I was a badass rushing to uncover the reasons behind the story's events. The graphics on display are beautiful works of sprite art and aren't limited by their small screen origins. And as for you fans of the series, you may want to dive back into it for the arranged soundtrack alone. At any point, you can switch between 2 different renditions of the game's songs and even the original version's audio. Ys 1 has been a wonderfully enjoyable visit to my brain's nostalgia centers. The difficulty, pacing, and story hold up to modern expectations while still retaining their, for lack of a better word, retro feel. The bright, well-drawn pixel art is a treat for the eyes, and the music in the game is truly something to marvel at. I fully recommend this game for action RPG fans, and even those of you who, like myself, are fans of the series but have never experienced the earlier entries. For those of you on the fence, both the first and second Ys games can be found on Steam for a mere $15 together, and this same version is still available on the PSP for about the same price. In my humble opinion, the Ys series is one that everyone should experience, and the first entry has definitely bump-attacked its way right into my heart. Adal may have left Asteria as a hero, but he will be remembered as a trashed classic. Alright guys, thanks for checking out another episode of Trash Classics. If this review piqued your interest in any way, shape, or form, you can check out my review of Ys 7 for the PSP right here. But before you do that, a little thumbs up would be well appreciated. And also, if you have any advice for me or just want to talk, you can hit me up in the comments section or find me on Facebook or Twitter. And with that, I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later.